welcome everyone. We're going to talk about overcoming the challenges of Microsoft Teams with all of the continuous updates. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is really what we're going to go through real quickly. I'll let you read that, but the key part is, as was mentioned by Liz, if you have any questions as we're going through, please put them in the chat panel because we've allowed some time afterwards, and we've got two experts with us that can help answer any questions you might have. So next slide, please. My name's Kevin Keeler. I'm the co-founder and the lead analyst at Enable UC. We focus on helping organizations make the most of the Microsoft Teams and associated ecosystem. I'm thrilled to moderate this because we have two experts in this area, and I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves. Tom, why don't you start?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Great to be on. So just briefly, I'm Tom Arbuthnot. I worked for about 10 years in a Microsoft specialist focused on Microsoft UC, so mostly working with large enterprise customers. Just recently, I've spun out to build my own company, Empowering Cloud, and we're really focused on Teams advisory, guidance, training, and putting a whole lot of content online at Empowering Cloud. I also have another hat. I'm a solutions director at a telco called Pure IP, so have a few different views of the world from the different hats I wear.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Tom, and we're thrilled that you could join us. And John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Jonathan Sieg. I am the head of product at tekVizion. That's product management, product marketing, and strategy. My background in voice over IP goes back to the late 90s, I'm afraid. I'm an old guy in this. I was with Cisco, BroadWorks, BroadSoft, both BroadWorks and BroadCloud stuff. And I go back into Nortel and Bay Networks. So it's been 24 years working in VoIP now.
I think it's more wisdom and experience as opposed to being old. But so, John, that's great that you're here. So let's move to the next slide and we'll get into it. I mean, we are going to discuss really, as Microsoft Teams evolves rapidly, that makes it challenging for vendors who have pieces that are interconnecting and for enterprises who are trying to provide, a continually quality service. So if we take a look at the next slide, there's no question that Microsoft Teams has wide adoption. And this slide kind of captures how people are using Teams. Of the 345 million paid commercial Office seats, about 80% of those, so the 270 million monthly active users of Teams, so 80% of all the Office seats, people are using Teams. Now, they're not always using all the features of it. 80 million of those, approximately 30%, are using it on a regular basis to make calls. And of those, about 12 million are fully enabled for PSTN calling, meaning that Teams is their primary voice system so they can place and receive calls to the PSTN. So this is certainly, you got a lot of people using Teams in a lot of different ways. And certainly, if we take a look at the next slide, I think one of the things that is driving, this 270 million monthly active users is the fact that Teams continues to evolve rapidly. So I went to the Microsoft 365 roadmap site, and you can filter by product. And you can see right now that there's 69 new Teams features that are in development, 70 are rolling out to the different tenants. And it says 349 there launched, but Microsoft just reported at Microsoft Ignite that in the past year, there was over 450 updates in the past year. So that's 30.
I think not everything makes the roadmap, which is one of the challenges, right?
That's a good point, Tom. But you're looking at, over 30 updates a month. And, this is a real challenge. So this is great that it's evolving rapidly. But if you're an IT pro dealing, or if you're a vendor or if a service provider or a carrier, and you want to make sure that your services continue to operate while all of this is changing, that becomes a little bit of a challenge. And if we take a look at the next slide, on top of all of these, those kind of looking back, Microsoft Ignite a couple weeks ago, they have a giant book of news, and it was like 65 pages. So I took that and I dumped it into a word cloud, and that's what came out on the left-hand side. And you can see that Teams is one of the areas where there was a lot of changes mentioned. And in fact, things that aren't even, mentioning Teams, they're often surfaced for the first time in Teams. And some of the significant things that, you need to be aware of, now there's some new licensing, both in the Room side, but also now with Teams, this Teams premium licensing. But that means that in terms of keeping things working and ensuring that they are, you may have users that have access to different features. So that kind of adds another wrinkle to complexity. At Ignite, Microsoft announced that they're changing, again, some of the user interface components, which also is potentially challenging. So the new channel user interface layout, they're changing it to make it easier, moving, things around from the bottom to the top. But that's all means changes. And of course, now there's new device types, some center of a table, new vendors, most notably Cisco bringing Microsoft Teams rooms. So there is a lot of continual, constant evolution and change in the Teams world. And so this, brings me really to the first question, which is on the next slide. Let's move it. There you go. So, okay, lots of change. What are some of the common challenges that enterprises face due to this constant world of updates? And why don't I start with you, Tom?
Yeah, so I have a good amount of experience in this world, particularly with large multi, tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of seats in some use cases, customers, and it is a real challenge. I mean, there's the obvious one that most people see is trying to keep users informed of experience changes and when things are changing, UI changes, button changes. I think everybody's got a bit better at rolling with that. Back in the day, anything changing even minutely was like a disaster for enterprise, but the reality is things do change now. But enterprises also often have lots of ecosystem vendors in their solution. They'll have compliance recording, they'll have maybe VDI, they'll have a load of different device vendors. So enterprises end up being almost their own integrator in that they're taking all these different solutions to complete their solution. And maybe they work with partners, maybe they do it in-house, but they have to be aware of the changing landscape. Things like Operator Connect versus Teams Phone Mobile versus direct routing. To deal with a multi tens of thousands of seat enterprise, you have to have people either as partners or on staff who understand all these different interconnected components and experiences and what's changing with Microsoft on the UI side, but also the API and the services side as well.
No, that's some good points. John, from your perspective, what do you see in terms of enterprise challenges?
Well, I think one of the big problems for enterprises is so much is changing. So we've talked about the hundreds and hundreds of changes in the Microsoft world, but in a lot of cases, the larger Microsoft enterprise customers are also in a state of transition, moving things from on-premise, the more traditional stuff they've had, to the cloud. It's happening rapidly, but it's not happening overnight for those big players. If things are working, you're not tearing it out. So now they've got this hybrid environment. They're steadily replacing it with the cloud. They're constantly introducing more devices. The conference room stuff has just gone crazy. Everybody's demanding it. More and more people are back in the office. You can see today I'm not at home. Normally I'm at my house on the water, and here I am in a gray office in Plano, Texas. With all those changes, one of the problems is Sometimes it's an experience change that users get thrown on a Monday morning with. Sometimes it's a change to the Wi-Fi network. It's a bunch of different things are changing at the same time. Different service providers, certainly all these hundreds of changes. One of the things that we hear both from enterprise and we hear from service providers is when something changes, there's a lot of what broke or what changed in the experience. And when things are reported, is that a major outage or is it a voice quality issue? When something is dropped mid-call, all the service providers are virtually all 5 nines now. But the difference is voice quality, dropped calls, problems with experience. What we're hearing is everybody is looking for more instrumentation, more validation of what's going on, and quite frankly, more than what CQD can provide today, because that's kind of inside the Azure network, as opposed to end-to-end touching all the places Office 365 Teams goes.
Yeah, no, that's some good points. And let's go, I think that transitions well into the next question. So what I remember. So because Microsoft Change is, almost being updated on a weekly basis, you mentioned, John, obviously, if I'm a service provider, if I'm a carrier, if I'm a device vendor, I want my services and my devices to continue to work. And I also want to understand if it's kind of my problem or is it a problem, kind of in some other piece, whether, or from a Microsoft perspective. Tom, I guess we'll start with you as well. Like, how can service providers and carriers and device vendors keep up, and are they keeping up?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. So Microsoft are very big, and there's lots of people, and there's lots of comms, but different comms come from different groups, and there's various different channels. Like you called out there's the public roadmap, there's Message Center in Teams Admin Center, but also if you're a certified partner, you may be on partner programs. There are partner updates. There's the Teams program tap for early access to content, so some people may be on that. Device vendors have their own programs, the service providers have their own programs. And kind of what it comes down to, and this is kind of my world, this is what we do at Empowering Cloud, is take all this data and try and synthesize it into sane updates. It's hard if you're the person in the service provider who's responsible for watching Microsoft changes. I think the biggest challenge is not everything gets broadcast as loudly as it should. So APIs change over time, programs change over time. So you have to be either well plugged in with Microsoft, and I certainly see a lot of the big partners have full-time roles that are just Microsoft relationship and updates. Basically, that's their job. Or you have to look at partners or specialists who can help you decode all that information. And I'm seeing with the service providers particularly that market is growing with Operator Connect. And service providers are coming into this world who are not from our world, like the Microsoft world, and they don't appreciate that the APIs will change fairly regularly. Like life with Microsoft is a moving target. It's not you're certified and you're done. So I'm certainly seeing on the service provider a new kind of appreciation of having to be aware and keep up with Microsoft changes.
Yeah, that's definitely some good points there. I mean, we're definitely seeing with Operator Connect, and just as Teams becomes more successful, we're getting more and more vendors into the ecosystem, and they may not understand this, but it clearly sounds like it's more than a full-time job, just even trying to keep up with, kind of the information coming out from Microsoft, and that's not even doing any testing with that. So John, what do you see, and what, from a service provider, carrier, and device vendors, how can they possibly keep up?
Yeah, we're seeing it in two areas. Now, tekVizion is 20 years young today. We've been around for that long, and we started in certification testing for Cisco, for BroadSoft, for Microsoft, and all the variations leading up to Teams. back to the ACS stuff, not ACS, I can't even remember the name, OCS.
Yeah, OCS. Yeah, me and Kevin were there, I think.
Business and everything else. In the old days, with things being, on servers, things changing quarterly, sometimes every 6 months or every year. Certainly, the large service providers used to say, well, you can have more than a few releases, but we're going to take one a year, and we'll roll that out. You can give us more clients, but we're going to roll out one desktop client and one mobile client a year. We're not going to support all these sub things. Today, you've got a world with CI/CD going on, where everything's being constantly integrated, deployed. As you pointed out, sometimes the revs don't even change, but things are changing. And then everything's changing. The networks are changing, the users are changing, features are being added. It's a very competitive market, frankly, between WebEx and Teams. So we see two things happening. One is, we used to be much more transactional with our customers, whether they were service providers or device vendors. They do certain certifications, they do certain regression testing. What we've gotten hit with in the last couple of years is requests for programs where we're continually testing. And this means assigning resources, automation platforms. Something we do is a lot of automation of the testing. We're seeing where they're asking for us to keep this going more or less all the time on a dedicated basis, particularly service providers. They're asking for a little bit more complex systems, because we're able to sit our automation platform in the cloud, but they want us hooked into their development networks for testing. And we're being asked to more or less continually put out reports monthly. And in a lot of cases, there's so many things changing. We're looking at certain reports go out this week, more reports next week, then the next week, and then it all cycles around and starts again. And that's great for us, but it's a lot of work. And internally, service providers are just finding they can't do that on their own. It's overwhelming, and most of the organizations don't have the kind of resources where they can put 10 or 20 individuals on testing, or maintain the automation stuff that they may have developed in-house, or frankly, more and more they're looking to us to use our platform and do the test scripts and things. The second part of this is we're getting more and more requests for monitoring the live NetOps, the production network where everybody is, rather than strictly being on the test side. We're being pushed, and we love it, into being on the live network. So we've been rejiggering and improving our platforms so that we're end-to-end on the live network. We're acting as enterprise customers. We're testing end-to-end. We've got a big launch of something called Spotlight coming out in January. And at that point, we've upped the voice quality testing. We're doing all sorts of metrics. One of the things we're getting requests from service providers is bring in the CQD data and timestamp it together with your data so that we can see where there are discrepancies, or we can collectively identify with Microsoft when it's not our problem and it's an enterprise problem, or it's a release and something changed. And we're getting lots of complaints that seem like it's a big problem, but it's actually a change in the interface. And
I hear that a lot on the service provider side. It's kind of the mean time to innocence thing of like, well, Microsoft changed some things, we changed some things. How do the enterprise change some things on their firewalls? Like, and it's all this, and often the service provider is particularly caught in the middle between Microsoft and the enterprise, saying, well, Microsoft say it's not them, and I don't think it's us. So I definitely hear that challenge in the real world.
Yeah, so it's pushing us into the production network, because you're not going to find those problems in the test network. Things are basically working pretty well. Right. So, it's scaling that, it's hitting more capabilities. It's actually an exciting time because, let's face it, that the monitoring quality assurance side of things, unless you're in the middle of it, can seem pretty dry. For us right now, it's kind of interesting. We're getting sucked into a lot of places we hadn't before. We're also seeing regional issues where just how people use Teams in Japan is different than how they use it in Europe, is different than North America. The back to work thing, whether they're in the office or separate, starting to uncover not so much bugs as just the development side of Microsoft thought it would be used this way, and people are finding different ways to use it, how they sit together, how they share a chat, or how they share a hunt group just has changed.
Well, yeah, there's constant change. And let's go to the next question, because certainly, like I've had this. So I had this wonderful, a very nice video and audio manufacturer gave me a brand new device, and using it with Microsoft Teams. But then in 1 week, I couldn't use it because I think when I dug into it, the device vendor and Microsoft, they both thought each other were doing the echo cancellation, and they didn't want 2 echo cancellations. So they both, however, turned it off, which meant that I just had tremendous echo between the mic and the speakers. Clearly that impacted me, and I'm just one person. So what are you seeing, John? I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but now there's all these different third-party devices, and that might be used, and especially, and I think you mentioned the service provider, and to some degree they're in the middle, like they're providing the service, so they're ultimately going to get the first call. So how do you see these challenges impacting especially these third-party devices?
It's hitting them pretty hard. And the interesting thing is, device vendor business, when I came on board, I would have said was kind of a steady declining business, because frankly, desk phones seem to have stabilized, except that with COVID and the chip shortages, all the major and minor device vendors for desktop phones had to scramble and change the chips. So you may have the same outer shell, the same functionality, but they've had to put different processors in. They've had to reprogram to get this is new code to get the same features. And we ran into a bunch of stuff there where we were in many cycles of testing. Flip that over, the whole conferencing thing has gone nuts, from home, right, from small huddle rooms like I'm in now, to larger conference rooms. And with that, there's not just a couple of clear winners. There's so much innovation going on. There's so many new devices coming out, and everybody's coming out with multiple iterations. It's going to go on for another few years as they get this better and better. Hopefully they come up with a camera that doesn't make me look like a cherry tomato. They're certainly going to do better things with backgrounds. Just the overall quality today is unbelievable compared to where we were. I remember the early days of video conferencing, literally in the mid 90s. And I mean, we never thought we'd be where we are today, but it's going to be so much better. And what we're seeing again is device vendors are coming to us and they're looking at more than just certifying. They need regression testing, because as we've been talking about, things are changing 100 times a year. They've got to stay up with that, and then they've got to be bulletproof in so many different environments, because
I think that regression testing's, yeah, that's a really good point, Jonathan, because it's interesting when, if you think back 5-10 years, which we all go back that far, the OEM device manufacturers would ship the device with their firmware. They maybe update it once a year. The enterprises wouldn't update them anyway, so they basically sit there doing their thing. And now we're in this world where Microsoft pushes code to those devices. So those devices are forced on a very fast train of change, and not all the OEMs are used to that. And they have their bits and pieces and their world and Microsoft's world and the enterprise's world to deal with. So it's been interesting seeing, for example, in the Microsoft world, the Android updates, like the OEMs are going to be responsible or are responsible for updating the underlying Android, which you pointed out, different chipset vendors, different features. It gets very interesting very quickly.
And the device guys used to not change the code. It was like a download of firmware, and even just a few years ago, you had to get a code load and move it into your phones. Everybody's going to CI/CD. These machines are self-updating, and they're writing code as fast as Microsoft is, sometimes faster.
So let's go on to the next question, because I mean, ultimately, these challenges impact the end user experience. And so, I think, John, you said Monday morning, most users, they're not enamored with the technology. They just have an important call on Monday morning, and they get up, and if something's not working, clearly that's not a good end user experience.
Sure.
Tom, is this problem? Are people figuring out how to deal with this? Is this problem getting worse? Because it seems like the pace of innovation, which is, it's great innovation, but it seems like the pace is increasing, and the different use cases that are trying to be serviced as there's more and more people, seems like that's expanding as well. So what's
Yeah,
happening?
I mean,
Yeah.
the end user challenge is interesting. I think different organizations are approaching it in different ways. I think end users got more resilient during the pandemic, and that some of that has stuck. Like the reality, if you worked in a legal pro services, like a big enterprise, telling the user to try and work around an issue wasn't very acceptable like 5 years ago. Like they were like, no, it works, don't work. Don't tell me to reboot. Don't tell me to, stand on one leg and turn around. Like it should work. But when everybody kind of muddled through the pandemic, there was a little bit of like, oh, okay, I'll reboot it, I'll restart it. So in some sense, users have got better at trying to cope with change. But still, the aspiration is that they're your employees. You want to keep them productive, so you want to minimise the impact. And there's two camps. There's just change in experience, like are they getting the most out of the platform you're paying for? Do they know about the new features? Are they making the most of it? And then there are actual issues. We have an issue with direct routing, and potentially people don't do as many PSTN calls as they used to. So that might sit around for a couple of days before we work out the critical mass of people having an issue. That can be a real problem. But Teams meetings carried on because that's a different part of the infrastructure. So I think the end user challenge is just getting a clear answer on what the issue is, what the possible resolution is, which obviously reflects on IT a lot.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd say honestly, it's getting better. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I was just going to bridge it by saying, it is nice that people are getting perhaps more resilient, or they're putting up with more, maybe. But I know
it's not the aspiration, is it?
Yeah, but I know, John, you talked about like shifting from the reactive, where the IT pros go and something happens, somebody complains, and now I try to figure it out. I may or may not have visibility into the whole thing, so I don't really know. But switching more to kind of a proactive, where ideally, like, I know about it before the first end user calls me 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, there's a famous study that came up with a figure that I always hold on to, that if you screw up something for a customer, they typically tell 13 people about that screw up sooner or later. They say, hey, I was doing this and this happened and that was terrible. And if you give good service, they tell 3 people. So it's very asymmetrical. You ran into a problem with the device, Echo went crazy. I mean, that's a great story, and we've just told it to a bunch of people. Problems happen all the time, and the scale of this is getting really big. More and more companies, large, very large, and very small, are using this technology. It just exploded after COVID and the work at home and all the different ways people do things today. But what we see is that may not be as apparent, because we work with a lot of these device vendors. They have contracts with us. The ones that have gone to continuous testing, where they're nailing down resources and they're asking us to constantly be updating the test scripts for the automation. They're asking us to get more involved in some of the manual things, to quickly look at some of the video stuff that automation is great for. In the middle of all that stuff, it's actually getting better for a lot of these guys when they get into that cadence and they're regularly keeping on top of things. Because if you're testing early enough that when the revisions are coming out, if you're staying in sync with the stuff Microsoft is doing, there's occasionally stuff that changes on a Monday morning at 2 a.m. That causes a problem. But as I said, we're moving more into that production network of monitoring. And as we do the synthetic monitoring using bots, as we're doing more real user monitoring on our part, it gets better. And it's part of the process that it will get better. But it's not like it goes away. It's kind of like vaccines. I'll be all controversial. You thought you're going to get a vaccine and you were done. I'm on my fifth.
Right.
And we're going to have to do similar things in this space because we're not going to abandon all this great conferencing and communication. But this is the price. You have to keep testing. You have to keep coordinating between all the pieces. And don't even get started on the contact center. There's a whole nother layer of complexity in software and AI stuff that's coming at us as well.
Well,
I'm seeing it.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
I was just going to say. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, just to add to what Jonathan said there, like I'm seeing the smarter enterprises start to ask those questions of their providers as well. So like they're not the old, like, it's the magic cloud, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. They're like, no, how do you actually deal with this change? Like what are you doing around device updates? What's your program? What's your plan? Because it's a good indicator for those enterprises that might be investing, hundreds of thousands or even millions in devices and services. Like, is this a safe bet for my enterprise?
We have service providers right now asking us to develop reports that are professional with the tekVizion watermark that they can provide to their enterprise customers. And where that used to be kind of a thought for big customers, now they're saying, I want to give it to everybody to say, we're so open, we'll let a third party with credibility report to the enterprise level.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, let's flip to the next slide, because I did want to drill down on, I know, Tom, you and I, and now with your Empowering Cloud initiative, I mean, we always believe that, training, change management, communication, both to the end users and the IT pro, is of critical importance. So, we're focused on, and I think we've for many years been doing our part in terms of that side of the equation. But John, you mentioned a bunch of things, but, can you drill down a little bit more on, you mentioned things like synthetic transactions, and, I know there's some robotic process automation so that when a button moves, that doesn't break everything. Help me understand a little bit more, so Tom and I, we do all the stuff on the one side of the house, but, if I'm a service provider, a carrier, device manufacturer, how do all those things in a little more detail help me out?
Sure. I think first off, I mean, this is a great slide for us, so we get to talk about tekVizion for a bit. Because we've been in this business for now going into our third decade, a real key to this is the Microsofts, the Ciscos, the WebExes, the largest carriers, the equipment device vendors. They're all clients of ours, and they're customers, and we test for them. The great thing is we have an ability to rapidly reach the right people when there's a problem. We're working for customer A, and he's having problems with devices. He's having problems with a particular platform. We can act as glue and make that connection together. The other thing, as you mentioned, is yes, we do robotic automation. The dirty secret of testing telephony, and particularly video conferencing, is you're never, ever, ever going to 100% automate this. The trick is you want to automate as much as you can. You've got to rapidly be able to make changes and updates as new features happen or major UI changes happen. But it's a balancing act. The other thing you need is you need a lot of people that know this space, have spent a significant part of their career coordinating with device vendors and testing and communicating. It's not just magic automation, and it's not just a bunch of people pushing buttons. You need people that have the expertise. You need the documentation. You need the organization and the planning to get involved in the testing earlier and to run things these days as a program. When this company started, everything was transactional. Test against this particular version. It's not going to change for 6 months. We're not going to change our devices. They're not going to change their just beginning IP network within a service provider is being measured slow rollout. Today, it's all changing. So, our advantage, we can be kind of Switzerland. At the same time, we have a tremendous amount of experience. And then we have just literally, at this point, probably hundreds of thousands of scripts that we use for testing. We already have in place most of the devices that exist And chances are when we work with a particular service provider, we've already got scripts for most of the devices they've got. Likewise, we can flip around to a device vendor and test on all the different platforms. Of course, Teams being the one that's red hot right now, but whether it's a Ring Central or a WebEx or Zoom, they're all premier tenants of ours, as are a bunch of the contact center stuff that we're seeing more and more. That's a big place of problems on top of everything is contact center. That's a whole nother layer of complexity, of traffic patterns, of using features that frankly the desktop office user wasn't using before. So the big part is all those pieces coming together, not just doing it on a transactional basis, but doing it on a programmatic basis. And then it's constantly moving this forward with people that are dedicated to this work. It's very hard within a service provider. I remember at BroadSoft, we had 6 people doing this work. There's no way to keep up once you move to the cloud. And that's kind of the tekVizion advantage. We sit these days on 5 continents. We're headquartered here in Texas, but we've got people working 24/7 around the globe and frankly communicating extremely well with everybody we're talking about here, the device vendors, the service providers, the large enterprise. I think our next challenge is how we communicate and interface with smaller enterprises through our partners so that everybody's happier, getting a better experience. And there's none of those 9 o'clock on Monday morning, we suddenly found our desk phones are hung and we're looking at a completely different interface on our conference system. So it may be working fine, but we're not really sure at this moment.
Well, no, that's definitely some hope and it's great to see kind of how the evolution of the kind of the one and done testing, which was great because you knew the certified device was going to work, but it's nice to see this, kind of how tekVizion is evolving and stepping up to, as things are changing more rapidly. I wanted to.
I can go a week without saying testing anymore. So much more of what we do these days is monitoring, where we're putting the bots up on the live network and we're making calls and conferences and we're doing this stuff. And that is where the future and the action is. That ability to be there is going to be the thing that catches those problems that are introduced at 2 a.m. on a Monday or 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning.
Right.
We're catching them at 3:15.
The line's kind of blurring, isn't it, between monitoring and testing? Because you would have said you tested in pre-prod and you monitored in prod, but like people roll out early code to infrastructure to customers, like you roll out in stages and phases. So monitoring is testing and testing is monitoring in a way.
It is true, but the world has changed so much.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that. Yeah, so monitoring equals continuous testing. There you go. That's gonna be. There you go.
Now struggling with that terminology because our continuous testing on the test side tends to be the reports going weekly. Our monitoring is where we're reporting, literally within minutes.
I see. So yeah, the semantics matter. And Liz, I just wanted to see if there was any questions from the audience.
Not currently. So
okay, I think that there was one that had come in that said. So let me just see here. So there's lots of built-in Microsoft reports, and you got. I mean, I think so you got CQD and Teams Admin Center and the Admin Center and some Power BI reports, and so why can't I just use like that whole collection of Microsoft reports?
Yeah, I'll give one example. I was just visiting a service provider, a pretty big one, and they said, we're getting some reports here and there via CQD that we have a 15-second delay on voice happening in different places randomly. And they said, there's no way it's happening. We don't believe it. What we'd love to see is your monitoring and suck in the CQD. And these are the guys with the data lake and larger stuff. They said, but we would love to see you just put side by side while you're calling, here's what CQD is saying, and call out the discrepancies. And this is something we're working on right now, and say, these don't agree. The Moz test scores are different. The delays are different. The connectivity levels are different, or they're exactly the same, but that somebody outside can see that. So often it's like, I hate to say it, it's like a game of telephone where the problem happens at the enterprise, it's reported to IT reports into a service provider, the service provider report. By the time somebody is dealing with that deep in the service provider, the carrier, by the time a device vendor is involved, they're not really sure what happened. So there's a constant need for more data. And I'll tell you, the place we don't see it happening, the data being available, is end-to-end, which is where we play. So increasingly, we're being asked, of course, to do our bots, and then we're being asked, how much can you touch the real enterprise and direct route? Can we give you some phone numbers and hide you and let you do your thing and then provide the reports to the enterprise? Can you query the SBCs? We're doing that from internally, but more and more it's quickly correlating. We're also, the weirdest thing, which is a good thing, is we're finding that we're being asked to be more tangible. When we do a contract with a service provider, typically we've dealt with the DevOps people, the people that are concerned with the latest releases and things. We're now releasing a mobile app that while somebody's getting coffee that paid for our service, they can look down and see everything's green, everything's working fine. Most of the time, everything is working fine, but the reassurance of that, they can finish their coffee, they don't have to get a to-go cup. It's really a thing where if somebody says, oh, I'm hearing a lot of problems around this or that, they can say, actually, this is what it looks like. Likewise, if things get broke at 2 in the morning, increasingly are saying, we'd love to have a mobile app that says we were making lots of calls in these different regions, and all of a sudden we're seeing it dropping off. And as we releasing this thing, Spotlight, people are saying, we don't want 30 or 40 bots testing the calling. We actually want to spread them out over the whole network and instrumentize the whole thing from the endpoints through, so that if it's a Microsoft change, a device change, a network change, enterprise network change, we're going to see it when it happens within a few minutes. We're going to start working on it. And it's interesting. We never thought that. We kind of thought it went all off to the larger visualization tools and be reported weekly or monthly. People are looking for how can they know first that everything's great every time they look at their phone, and then if it's not, that they get that notification much quicker.
Yeah, no, that's definitely would help in terms of, I always thought the best statistic was user satisfaction, right? And the user doesn't really care, that it's not this part or this part that's broken. If the whole end-to-end piece isn't working, or if it's working with delay, or in my case, with so much echo, that, that was working. But it was like, it wasn't working for me as a user, and it certainly wasn't working for anybody at the other end. So, that increasingly that monitoring with that synthetic transaction type of thing, really the proof is in the pudding, right? And a lot of times, the whole infrastructure piece is working, but maybe my headset is wonky, or maybe my laptop or a driver or what have you. And the only way to know all that is really to do that. Maybe I'll call it monitoring or continuous testing, whatever your results are.
Sometimes you have to be on the real client. That's one of the things that compared to CQD, we were actually going down to the real stuff as opposed to kind of being in the network, checking that much of the network. And, all of it's important and works well together and in concert. But I've been surprised on how much end-to-end is the conversation we're in today.
Well, I think with that, I think we're pretty much at time, but I mean, just maybe quick closing comments, Tom?
I think it's a good topic, and I think that my closing thought is it's only going one way, and it's not going back to single versions and waiting 6 months. Like continuous deployment, continuous development is the future. So I think enterprises, service providers, OEMs have to live with that reality. That is the world now.
And John, any closing comments?
First, I'd like to thank you, Kevin, and I'd like to thank Tom. It's been great to do this with you guys, and I look forward to having more conversations in the future. But I'll tell you, one of the things I look forward to is things are going to change in the next 2-3 years. How we work, we think this changed. It's going to change even more. The quality of the services is going to change, and you're going to see just a revolution in contact center happening. You're going to see more and more things that, frankly, we didn't really anticipate. We're kind of in the early days of unified communications. It seems like it's been around for a while, but it's just now getting truly interactive, the ability to share documents properly. It's going to go to a whole nother level, and it's exciting times.
Well, thank both of you. I think on the next slide, we've got just some links to some helpful resources. I mean, Tom writes a fantastic blog, and I don't write as much as him, but I try to educate. And as well, there's some articles on this topic, robotic process automation on the tekVizion blog, because I know tekVizion is really trying to play an educational role and helping people figure this out as as the testing and monitoring strategies need to improve. Certainly, if a few questions may have come in and we didn't have time to answer them, but please reach out to any of us. We're happy to continue this discussion. Here's our contact information, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Everybody.
And thank you, everybody out there.